Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Portfolio Management and the PMO, Cost Center or Revenue Driver. My name is Michelle. I'll be helping with today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate. This webinar is being recorded, so we will send you a link to the recording as soon as it is available. You have joined today's webinar listening through your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to use your telephone, just locate your audio pane and select Use Telephone. The dial-in information and access code will then be displayed. Attendees will be in listen-only mode, but we invite you to ask questions about the presentation using the questions panel. Just type in your question and click send. At the end of the webinar, we will do a Q&A session and take as many of those questions as possible. Let's try and continue the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag #WhatThePMO. And just so everyone knows, this webinar does qualify for 1 PDU credit. We will provide the activity number at the conclusion of the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today. Dan Stober is a PMP-certified Senior Product Manager with more than 10 years of experience managing projects. His experience includes managing projects for the U.S. government in the United States, Middle East, and Europe. So appreciate you being here with us today, Dan. Welcome, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Hope everybody's doing well today. So we're going to talk about portfolio management, and we're going to talk about the PMO and whether this should be viewed as a cost center or a revenue driver. You know, a lot of organizations shy away from the establishment of a PMO or an enterprise PMO and don't really do a great deal of portfolio management. So we're going to talk about some of the ramifications of that as we go forward today, and how we can get our senior management on board to look at the PMO not like some sort of necessary evil, and don't look at portfolio management like a necessary evil, but something that can actually drive revenue. So already did our introduction. Thanks, Michelle, for that. So we're going to talk about aligning projects into programs and portfolios. So projects being about deliverables, programs about coordination, alignment, benefits delivery, and sustainment. And then the portfolio in the PMO is about managing organizational capacity and aligning things with strategy, aligning our projects and initiatives with our organizational strategy. We're going to talk about identifying the limiting resource and then management of the limiting resource. So we'll touch on that. Talk about effective portfolio management, how can we do it? And then one of the most important aspects to successful portfolio management is executive involvement in project success. So if you've ever worked in an organization where there wasn't a great deal of executive involvement or commitment in your projects, then you've probably dealt with the frustration that goes along with being given a set of objectives, being given targets, and then not being given the support you need in order to make it happen. So we're going to talk here about, and we want you to be able to understand the value of aligning portfolios with our organizational strategy. And when we say portfolio, you know, businesses can have multiple portfolios that align with multiple prongs of whatever their organizational strategy is. So we have you know, here at Global Knowledge, we have multiple portfolios that we manage. So it doesn't just have to be one portfolio. There can be more than one portfolio and more than one portfolio manager. We're going to understand some drivers of project failure, make the link between educating our organization and project success, get senior management on board to support portfolio management, and then select the correct training for your workforce. Okay, so start off by just looking at, you know, organizational project management. What is it? Well, organizational project management isn't the same thing as project management. Project management is, you know, applying a certain skill set and certain tools to the conduct of a certain project. Organizational project management is the management of our projects, programs, and portfolios in alignment with our organizational strategy. So the strategy of, you know, the portfolio of projects has to be driven by organizational and departmental strategy. Every project that's underway inside of an organization should in some way, shape, or form support the execution of our chosen strategy. So whatever strategy we're going to adopt in order to help us meet our organizational goals. Our projects should all align with them and support them in some way. However, what you find a lot of times in organizations that don't have effective portfolio management is that projects can just kind of spring up out of anywhere, and we're not exactly sure where they came from or why they're even being conducted. So project management, development and implementation of plans to achieve a specific scope driven by objectives of the program or portfolio which it's a part of. So it's applying that knowledge, skills, tools, techniques to project activities so we can meet our project requirements. Project management is very, very much about deliverables. It's about a product, service, or result that we're going to produce and then hand over either to somebody internally in operations or to an external client or customer. Program management, though, is taking multiple projects and coordinating them so that we can make sure they are supporting each other in ways that they wouldn't be able to do if we were doing it independently. You know, one problem within organizations also is sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and so we have a bunch of functional managers, VPs running around our organization, and if someone's at that level, a director or a senior director, that means they've probably got a budget. Because they've got a budget, they have ideas, and because of those ideas, they launch projects. And many times they launch projects without regard to our organizational capacity. Well, program management is like another step in between project and portfolio management, where we're going to coordinate a related set of projects and operations so that we can realize specific benefits. And then not only realize the benefits that each project is going to produce through its deliverable, but then also the sustainment of those benefits in the long term. So project management, we're going to produce some deliverable. Program management, we're not just going to produce a deliverable and it's kind of like flash to bang, we hand it over to somebody. Now we've got to make sure that the benefits were fully realized and that they're going to be sustained over the long term. Portfolio management is the alignment of projects with our organizational strategy, so we can make sure that we're conducting the right programs and projects and prioritizing the work, and then also resourcing our project and program managers. It's nothing is more frustrating, at least to me anyway, than being given a set of objectives without being given the resources to achieve them. So portfolio management is about making sure we're doing the correct projects and the correct programs that are in line with our organizational strategy, because we're going to do this to achieve certain specific strategic objectives, and then make sure we're also being resourced properly. So just to kind of sum that up, we just talked about project, program, and portfolio management real quick. Now we've only got an hour today, so we can't talk about it too much, but goals of organizational project management, all three of these fall under that, organizational project management. Portfolio management is about capacity, so allocating our resources according to organizational priority and ability. There's a difference between being efficient and being effective, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Just because we're doing a whole bunch of work doesn't mean we're doing the right work. Portfolio management is saying, okay, we're going to properly evaluate and prioritize these projects and conduct the ones that are going to generate the most value and that are most aligned with our organizational strategy. So it's about capacity also, because portfolio management takes into consideration, now look at it like this. Say you've got 5 different functional areas within an organization, and you have one sales department, or let's say marketing. We'll go with marketing. We have one marketing department, and you have 5 different functional managers, and all 5 of these functional managers are conducting projects that they're going to require marketing to work on in some way, shape, or form. If those 5 functional managers aren't talking to each other, and in many organizations they're not, how do they know that that marketing asset or that marketing resource that they're going to need, doesn't have 25 or 30 or 40 other things that are being brought to them right now. So portfolio management takes a look at organizational capacity, and every single organization has some sort of limiting resource. And whether it is the amount of business analysts that you have, whether it's the amount of capacity your network infrastructure can handle, there is some sort of limiting resource. Portfolio management identifies what that is and then manages it properly. Program management is coordination and benefit sustainment, so the achievement of organizational benefits. And then project management is about deliverables. It's about producing a product, service, or result. So when we look at an overview of portfolio management, you can kind of look at, okay, well, if we've got all these different functional managers that are, only getting 50 or 75% through with their projects because then they run into this bottleneck of the limiting resource. If there's no portfolio management function, then that's very, very likely to occur. So the portfolio management function, it adds value to the organization by making sure that we are not overcommitting and then experiencing project failure because we didn't take resource availability or capacity into consideration, especially when we're doing things that are time sensitive. So portfolio management in practice, what does that mean? Well, project portfolio management is to projects like owned by a company what a stock portfolio management is to investments. So every project represents an investment, just like the purchase of a stock on the stock market. Investors want to get the most out of each investment and can only do that by considering the combination that all of the investments make to their overall quote-unquote portfolio. So the principle behind portfolio management of both projects and stocks is that there's greater value obtained by managing all the investments collectively rather than separately. So it's hard to imagine a stock portfolio manager not managing investments on an overall strategic basis, but rather individually. So the objective of project portfolio management is to coordinate all project investments so we can maximize their collective value. It's very logical and simple in theory, but very difficult to do in practice. Portfolio management means that someone or some segment of the organization has central authority over all the important projects. And for stock portfolios, the process is simple because there's usually only one decision maker, and that's the owner of the investment or the investor, who will assign responsibility for buying and selling stocks to a broker or an asset manager. So coordination of stock investments is usually pretty easy, but it's not like that for project investments in a large organization. When it comes to projects within an organization, the situation is infinitely more complicated because projects or investments are typically being initiated by all levels of senior management. And coordinating those investments means controlling and decision-making processes are being taken away from those senior level managers, and a lot of them really don't like it. So if we looked at the PMI definition of a portfolio, it's a collection of projects, programs, and operational work grouped together to facilitate effective management and to meet strategic objectives. So what are strategic objectives or organizational strategy? Well, the objectives are what help us reach our strategy. Organizational strategy is, a plan of goals, policies, and actions that will provide the overall direction and focus for the organization. Organizational strategy defines the means of attaining organizational goals through operations, programs, and projects. And portfolio management is a tool that's used to implement an organization's overall strategic plan. It's basically a bridge between organizational strategy, program, and project management, and operations. And governance requires that all the parts are linked together and aligned with organizational strategy. We balance the use of resources to maximize the value for those expended resources. So portfolios and organization strategy, at any given moment, a portfolio represents a view of its components and is a reflection of the organization's strategy and objectives. That's what the standard for portfolio management, 3rd edition from PMI says. And a portfolio should be a representation of an organization's intent, direction, and progress. also from PMI's Standards for Portfolio Management. So it's basically a snapshot of what the organization feels is valuable, our portfolio of projects. So we need to make sure that we have the right projects underway and that they really do accurately represent the organizational direction and strategy. So characteristics of portfolios is that they should be aligned with one or more organizational strategies and objectives. Like I said at the very beginning, you can have more than one portfolio within an organization. Usually portfolios are much longer lived than an individual project. An individual project will just be a component of a portfolio. Think about it, like this. You don't open up your investment portfolio the year before you retire, or I guess some people do. If you do it, though, it's not going to have very good results. It's going to be a pretty narrow window for a portfolio. Ostensibly, we want to do it while we're in our mid to late 20s, so that it's a long-lived portfolio and we have time to recover if we have any sort of missteps. And portfolios can be one of multiple portfolios within the organization, and they can all be dedicated to a unique strategy or objective. So strategy drives portfolios. Organizational strategy will be things like our mission and vision, and then the strategies needed to achieve that mission. If you look at, say, let's talk retail. We have two different kinds of basic competitive strategies. One is price leadership and one is differentiation. So if I said to you, Walmart, well, what do you think their organizational strategy is? Well, their organizational strategy is price leadership. They're going to be the low-cost leader for pretty much most retail items you would need to go out and buy. If I said to you Nordstrom is different. They are not concerned with price leadership. They're concerned with differentiation. And so they would need to take or undertake, those two organizations individually need to take that into consideration. If we undertake projects that don't meet or don't fit with our organizational strategy, it can have detrimental effects on the organization as a whole. So, I mean, I don't know where everybody's at right now, but I know where I am. There's a Nordstrom at the mall near where I live in North Carolina, and my wife likes to shop there. It's probably her favorite store. And so when she goes to Nordstrom, she's not expecting everything to be the cheapest thing. That's what we expect when we go to Walmart. When we go to Nordstrom, we expect, fantastic customer service and, higher-end goods. If she walked in there one day and all of a sudden they were selling, the types of things that you would expect to find at Walmart, it would probably, in her mind, damage the brand. And damaging the brand by, if they said, hey, we're going to undertake this initiative where now we're going to start selling, insert, cheap item here and see how it goes. Well, it's outside of the purview of their organizational or competitive strategy. It wouldn't work well. So strategies need to be translated into initiatives that are influenced by a whole bunch of different factors: market dynamics, partner requests, shareholders, regulation, competition. We all know that regulations drive projects all the time. Compliance, especially in compliance-heavy industries, things like medical care, insurance, banking. And then our initiatives will drive the establishment of portfolios. So to put portfolio management into context, look at it from the bottom up. We have all these organizational resources, and these organizational resources are committed to projects, programs, operational work. And if they're all under the purview of a portfolio manager or a PMO, we can make sure that we're coordinating those organizational resources properly. But the portfolio needs to support the organizational strategy and objectives, and then those objectives need to support the organizational vision or mission. So there are two different kinds of management emphasis when we talk about project, program, and portfolio management. Portfolio managers are making sure we're doing the right work. We're doing the work that's actually going to add value and contribute to reaching our organizational goals or are in line with our organizational strategy that supports the organizational vision and mission. Program managers are making sure we're doing things right, and so are project managers. Project managers manage deliverables. Program managers manage project interdependencies so that we can achieve and sustain benefits in the long term. So what does the portfolio manager do that adds value for the organization? Well, they monitor, evaluate, and validate portfolio components in relation to, hey, are these projects aligned with organizational strategy and objectives? You know, one of the main reasons that organizations sometimes can be so hesitant to install portfolio management or a PMO is because now every project that we want to do within the organization, well, it doesn't have to be every project. There can be sort of thresholds where something, you know, you can have different tiers of projects if you really wanted to get super technical about it. But we're going to have this outside body or outside person looking at these projects as they're in the, you know, initiation stage and saying, you know what, that doesn't really align with our organizational strategy and objectives. And now all of a sudden, you know, people in senior management who sponsor projects have another additional layer of oversight, and sometimes they don't like that. But it's really a function to make sure we're not wasting resources or, you know, money on projects that don't support the organizational strategy. So alignment, also viability is part of the portfolio based on performance and risk. What's the, you know, ROI or expected net present value of this project? What's its risk, you know, threshold? Is it high risk? Is it low risk? Are we using some sort of new technology that we've never used before and we don't have organizational expertise on? Or are we doing a project that we've done 25 times before and we're really comfortable with it? And does that make it low risk? Relative to value in relationship to other components. Have you ever worked in an organization where you've had two different departments basically doing identical projects at the same time and nobody knows it? I have, absolutely have. Hey, and at this time, I want to go ahead and ask Michelle to launch our first poll. So got a poll here I just want to throw out there. And yeah, it's how much emphasis does your organization place on portfolio management? So Michelle's going to go ahead and put that out there. If I could get you guys just to vote on that real quick. You know, how much organizational commitment do we have for portfolio management? And in an organization, I mean, let's be honest. I came from a background managing projects in the federal government, and in that sort of an environment, there is massive duplication of effort. There are, you know, departments. There are sub-departments inside of departments that are all trying to do identical projects all the time. Or we have multiple agencies that provide overlapping and similar services all the time. And it's a waste. And we want to make sure that we're not doing that here. So let's see what kind of results we got. So got 24% highly important, 28 moderately, 32 less important, and 16 it's not even a consideration. Okay, so we have about 50% that say it's important or moderate or you know, moderately important, and then we have about 50% that say it's of low importance or not even a consideration at all. So for the 50% where it's not important or it's not even a consideration or it's of low importance, just think about, you know, how are we exercising restraint in the projects that we undertake? Well, the portfolio manager has a responsibility for guiding the selection, prioritization, balancing, and then determination of portfolio components. I wish I had a poll for this. I don't, but just think about this. Have you ever heard of the law of consistency? And the law of consistency basically means that once we kind of set out on a path, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that it's not a good idea, will stay on that path. So it's essentially, hey, we've already spent $1 million on this project. The budget was only $750,000. We've already spent $1 million. All we need is another $300,000, and we'll be able to bring this thing in. And at that point, you'll have spent $1.3 million instead of $750,000. So instead of, as you see trouble coming, and saying, you know what, this just isn't viable, organizations hate sunk costs. They don't like it. So instead of terminating a project, they'll actually a lot of times double down on it and say, well, by sheer force of will, we're going to make this project happen. The portfolio manager is supposed to be like the sanity check there, saying, whoa, hold on, all of our initial estimates were completely off base. This isn't going to do what we want it to do. We're trying to force it into doing what we need it to do. I think we need to terminate this and take another approach. So guiding the termination, not just the selection, but the termination of portfolio components. And when I say components, I mean projects and programs. Reviewing, reallocating, reprioritizing, and optimizing the portfolio. So making sure that all the components are doing what they need to do. They measure and monitor the components' contributions to the organization. So they're doing the benefits check, and then supporting senior level decision making with timely and appropriate information. Here, don't sit there and think, or don't make the assumption that the portfolio manager is just some sort of like omnipotent project god that can say, you know, squash projects or programs with the snap of a finger. It's not supposed to be like that. The portfolio manager is supposed to be an asset to senior management, and usually, you know, those C-level and just below decision makers, and say, hey, this project or this program supports this prong of our organizational strategy. They are there as a decision support tool, not necessarily the key decision maker each time. So what are some portfolio management activities? Well, of course, they receive information and make sure the flow of information on component performance and progress to and from components. So they are a conduit for information. They analyze information on the component's performance and then convey that information to the PGB or the PGC, Portfolio Governance Committee, I usually say PGC, about the alignment of the components with those strategic goals. And then they make recommendations to senior management, provide options for actions to be taken. Usually people that are in executive level management don't have the time to look at and evaluate and make recommendations on the hundreds of projects that can be going on inside of organizations. They need somebody else to do that, and that's the portfolio manager. So the PGB or the PGC, Portfolio Governance Board or Committee, makes decisions about priorities and then evaluates performance and makes resourcing, investment, and priority decisions as they need to be made. The portfolio manager is the key sort of advice or advisor, the key advisor to the Portfolio Governance Committee. They don't have to make all these decisions on their own, but they have the most information to guide and steer the PGB into making the correct project and program decisions. So chain of command usually goes something like this. You know, executives will determine the organizational vision, mission, and strategy. That strategy will drive the objectives that will support the accomplishment or the execution of that strategy, and then those objectives will drive the projects that our organization does. The role of the portfolio manager is to ensure that projects and programs are kept in alignment with our evolving organizational strategy. All right, the limiting resource. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. Limiting resources are the one or few resources that most often determine how many projects can be completed. A lot of times, organizations do not take into consideration the ability of, let me back up from organizations, and I'll say departments within organizations don't give any consideration to the capacity of other departments within organizations when they launch a project. They make assumptions that, oh, well, you know, this department, we're going to need them to do this to support this project. They never go and really talk to them about it, and they don't understand that they've got 50 or 100 other projects that they're also working on. So every organization has a limiting resource, something that prevents them from doing more. If it's, you know, FedEx or the post office or UPS or whoever, they've only got so many planes, they've only got so many trucks, and they've only got so many employees and so many facilities. And so, you know, if, for example, you know, the post office, let's just use the post office as an example. There are, what, 320 million people living in the U.S. right now. If all of a sudden tomorrow there were 600 million people living in the U.S. tomorrow, the post office would not be able to deliver everybody's mail because they don't have the people, the trucks, the facilities, so on and so forth, or the logistics to support that. And so you have to think about that. You can only squeeze so much. You know, you can't put 10 pounds of sausage in a 5-pound bag, but organizations try to do it all the time. So limiting resources are either staff, assets, equipment that serves as the bottleneck to project completion. And the resources that are limiting will change over time and will vary between departments. Maybe your department only has 1 business analyst, and maybe another department has 7 business analysts. And so they can do more, you know, process modeling and documentation and so on and so forth. Every organization has a limiting resource. Sometimes the limiting resource is money or just cash. And we have to make sure that if that's our limiting resource, we have to make sure we're using it properly. So we manage around the limiting resource. So every possible resource pool can't be managed. That's just the way it is. There are so many resources within organizations that we can't manage every single one. Every resource will have some level of management or oversight, but the portfolio manager or senior management can't manage every single resource in an organization. So we have to organize our effort and look at those resources that are going to most directly affect our organizational capacity, and those are the ones that we have to control. So don't know if anyone's ever seen this before. The Standish Group, they published a chaos report, and usually it's about every 2 years. So here we have some results that really show how poorly many organizations manage their projects. And so in 2012, only 39% of the IT project managers and executives that were interviewed for this or were surveyed for this, only 39% of their projects were deemed successful. That means that 61% were either challenged or failed. And why is that? Well, I mean, there are a whole bunch of different reasons, and we're going to start looking at them here coming up real shortly. But within organizations, many times, we just don't coordinate properly, or it's kind of like you set off on a 500-mile car trip and you realize at mile 200 that you're out of gas and you forgot your wallet and cell phone at home. That could make for a pretty bad day. Well, we want to make sure that we're not doing that, and the portfolio manager is kind of that person that makes sure you've got enough gas in the car and that you've got your wallet and your cell phone with you before you leave on that trip. So, you know, some courses or some things that could reduce failures like this. Global Knowledge has a bunch of courses that could help out with this, like requirements development, documentation, and management is one of the key ones to make sure that we actually develop our requirements properly. Having poor requirements at the outset sets people up for, or sets projects up for failure. Just totally sets them up for failure. So project management fundamentals, IT project management. So courses like that, so we can have everybody on the same page within the organization, are very, very helpful. So what were some of the reasons in the chaos report identified as to why projects failed? Well, inadequate planning was one, lack of control. So they're launched and then nobody ever does any monitoring and controlling, or control really is changing direction when we realize the performance doesn't match the plan. Lack of upper management support, poor risk planning or no risk planning, lack of end user support because we didn't gather requirements from the people who were supposed to actually use the product, service, or result that we're producing, poor communication, missed deadlines, unrealistic expectations. The list goes on and on and on. Complexity. And so any or all of these reasons can contribute to project failure. But what we want to really look at is reasons for project success. So why do projects most often succeed? Well, the key discriminator identified was executive support and organizational commitment. If an organization is committed to doing a project and they're committed to doing it right, then they're usually okay with making sure that the planning function goes properly before we just launch headlong into something. So a good management structure, reasonable stakeholder expectations, meaning that they don't expect you to be delivering them a Ferrari when you've only got, the budget for a Ford Escort. Skilled resources, good risk planning, change management is effective, communication's good, using a consistent project methodology, which many organizations don't do. It varies from department to department and even project manager to project manager. And then clear objectives and defined requirements. But the one that was highlighted the most was executive support and organizational commitment. So portfolio management enables us to do good, or organizations to do good scheduling and prioritization, helps us overcome bottlenecks, and then share our scarce resources. If you look at the role of portfolio management and project success, the biggest roadblock to successful project management in a multi-project environment is the way that corporate strategy is articulated. Sorry about that, I just got a little pop-up. I don't know what's going on with my computer here. Hopefully it won't happen again. The biggest roadblock, though, to successful project management is the way that corporate strategy is communicated to functional units. A lot of times it results in competition between departments and not cooperation. And the typical process is for corporate goals to be determined at the most senior level of the organization. And then those high-level goals are divided up between functional units like sales, projection, fulfillment, IT, so on and so forth. And they give each unit its own set of performance targets. Well, senior management for each functional unit then has to develop their own strategy for meeting their departmental performance targets. And it sounds reasonable, but what are the results of that division of responsibility? The effect of assigning independent targets to each functional unit is to motivate each functional unit to work independently, as if they were like separate companies so that they meet their own individual targets. When project work crosses over functional lines or attempts to integrate the activities of multiple departments, there's always going to be fighting over who should do what and why, and every department wants to get the most for the least input. And when there are insufficient resources to complete all the projects started by all the different departments, that's when we get battles over which department's projects are most important. And without some kind of referee or portfolio manager, the battles usually never get resolved. Instead, they result in bad multitasking of those scarce resources. So interdepartmental project management ends up looking like this. The key to successful project execution in a complex organization is some kind of high-level coordination. The difficulty is to impose this kind of cooperation on functional units that have been doing things their own way for a really long time. So what we end up having in the absence of an effective portfolio management function is that our project managers are competing for resources, and projects are prioritized on the basis of a project manager's or a functional manager's competitive skills. So it's where, and it's funny because even in the PMBOK guide, when it talks about underlying competencies that project managers should have, they always talk about the ability to influence and negotiate. Well, why? Because PMI knows that a lot of organizations don't practice good portfolio management, and that project managers are going to have to go out there and try to win over resources through the use of influence and, just their good people skills. So that's not the way it's supposed to work, though. It's supposed to work by, we're going to allocate resources to the most valuable projects. But instead, what we end up doing is we end up multitasking. We have conflicts between stakeholders, and that results in the sharing of scarce skill sets. The staff has to multitask to ensure that each project has access to scarce resources. So we're going to take, it's kind of like, I remember a long time ago, I was an Army officer, and when I was out on a training mission one time, and my little unit was just about out of water, and I called back to our logistics function and said, hey, we're going black on water, which means we're running out of water. And the person responded to me by saying, basically, resupply internally. And I said, what does that even mean, resupply internally? If I had internal resupply, I wouldn't be calling you. I said, what does that mean? I take my empty canteen and put someone else's water in it, and then they have an empty canteen? Or that we both have, 2 half-filled canteens? We don't have any more water. We need more water. It doesn't matter who's got it. We don't have enough. So it's kind of the same thing with resources in the corporate world. I like to talk about what I call the triple nickel. You've got 5 projects. They're all 5 weeks long, and we've got 5 resources. So instead of saying, okay, well, we're going to pick which project here is the most important, and we're going to load resources onto that so we can have the benefits, what most of the time ends up happening is we'll take one resource and give it to each project as if they're all equal. Well, usually they're not all equal. We don't have 5, equal projects all the time. One's going to be more important, and we have to figure out which one it is. Multitasking is scheduling individual staff with multiple assignments, and it forces us to move between tasks before completing any one task. Does it really matter if, you have 10 different projects underway, but they're all 20% complete? Or is it more important to have one of those complete that you can now realize benefits from, while the other 9 haven't been initiated yet? So the natural result of functional departments fighting over resources is to reach a compromise, and compromise boils down to agreements over how the resources will be shared between departments and projects. So rather than agreeing to have one project completed before another, the functional units agree to have a number of projects executed simultaneously. And the resources, or the skilled staff that are working on the projects, are usually forced to divide their time between a whole bunch of projects. And so what we end up with is multitasking, and we incur these things called switching costs. And switching costs mean, once you're on and doing something, you can't just stop and totally put your mind into something else. There's lag time in between. So we want to avoid switching costs. We also sometimes confuse efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is getting a whole bunch of stuff done, and effectiveness is actually getting the right stuff done. You can be incredibly efficient and do a whole bunch of the wrong work, or you can be incredibly effective and focus on the work that actually matters. So when we don't understand the difference between the efficiency and effectiveness, we end up with projects that take longer and cost more. We end up with wasted time, mistakes, confusion, and frustration. So what does portfolio management do about this? Well, it prioritizes projects based on organizational goals, not departmental goals. Because just because it's really, really important to marketing or really, really important to sales doesn't mean that it's really, really important to logistics or accounting or fulfillment or what, some other department. But portfolio managers understand where the real need is. Encourages consistent and repeatable processes so we can develop those organizational process assets that can be reused over time. Shares our resources efficiently, and then helps to avoid ineffective multitasking. So how do we get there? How do we get to portfolio management success? Well, the first and most important ingredient is executive involvement. There's no hope of changing the way that functional units interact without direct input from the highest levels of the organization. And the decision to manage projects as a portfolio has to come from the top. And in addition to that, the ongoing guidance of the portfolio has to come from a central authority with involvement of all the functional units. We also have to have a transparent prioritization system. Everybody needs to know what the method and criteria are used to select projects, and everybody has to have buy-in. In order for functional managers to cooperate in a centralized portfolio management program, they have to believe that the portfolio is being managed properly. Properly managed means that meeting the goals of the organization in a coherent and logical way. And then the third ingredient is a management team that collects and coordinates the information necessary to track and prioritize projects. That organization is the PMO. And that PMO might go by another name, but the result is the same. We have to have a central authority. So executive involvement, again, sorry about that. Executive involvement, they're determining our organizational strategy. The PMO tracks our project capacity and reports the results to the Portfolio Governance Committee or the Review Board. And then they choose between projects and sets of priorities. Transparent prioritization system, an effective evaluation system that will fairly compare the project's contributions to objectives. So it should be understood and universally accepted. And then the PMO, they're going to collect project or component data, analyze it, and then provide recommendations to the review board. And the PMO will seek solutions and improvement, not just out there looking for excuses and where to lay blame. That's not what the PMO is about. It's about helping us to solve our problems. But most organizations have this, the silo mentality. Functional units driven by independent targets. They're all launching projects, and more projects are pushed into the pipeline than the pipeline was built to handle. And so right now we're trying to put 10 pounds of sausage in a 5-pound bag. So what we end up with is conflicts between the departments, and that results in battles over resources. Project managers at this time don't even expect to be successful. So we need to have a holistic view of strategy. Fundamental change has to come from the top. In order for portfolio management to work, you must have a C-level executive behind it, typically the CEO or the COO. No one else has a sufficient influence to insist on cooperation from the functional units. Portfolio management success comes from the development of a holistic view of corporate strategy and objectives. And those objectives have to be articulated to the functional units in a way that ties department success to overall goals. And then the measurements of success between departments has to motivate them to work together and not independently. So why do we need portfolio management? Well, defective planning means that our human capital is mismanaged. And where do we try to mitigate that? Well, we do that at the Portfolio Governance Board or Portfolio Governance Committee. They're setting the priorities, not independent functional managers, and they meet regularly to decide which projects we're going to initiate, which we're going to kill, what are we going to put on hold, and what we need to learn more about. And when does this happen? Well, it should be happening continually. Strategic planning should happen continually. The mission statement determines what our strategy is. Strategy drives objectives, which drive investments in projects. And the Portfolio Governance Board will decide how best to consume the resources in order to accomplish strategic goals. And they should meet regularly or as necessary to react to things like competitive forces. Who should be represented? Well, senior representation from all the affected business units, which means if you have directors or senior directors in charge of functional units, or if we have VPs in charge, they should be sitting on this Portfolio Governance Board. And, how do we do that? How does senior management participate? Well, senior management participates in portfolio management by determining what the limiting resource is and how it's going to be used. Remember, the limiting resource is the resource or resource pool that's the most common bottleneck to project completion. So how are we going to consume it, and what's the best mix of projects to accomplish corporate objectives? and projects should be sequenced according to their contribution to strategic objectives. So what's the process for senior management participation? Well, we agree on how to determine project value. So how are we going to measure and compare projects? We're going to review all of our options, so use analysis and recommendations provided by the portfolio manager, because remember, the portfolio manager is the person that's going to have the holistic view of all of the components in the organization. And then they'll choose between projects, decide how the organization's limited project resources are going to be consumed and how they're going to be shared. So what do we need to do to train our organization to do this right? Well, we can set the foundation first and foremost by having our project managers take common methodologies and apply them consistently across the organization. So you can take a project management fundamentals or an IT project management class, depending on which kind of environment you're in. Build competencies and then sustain benefits. Project management, leadership, and communication, and then program management. Teach our program managers, hey, how do we make sure that our components are delivering the benefits that they need to deliver, and then are we prepared to sustain it over time? And then taking your project management to the next level, getting your folks certified. PMP exam prep boot camp can get them ready to take the exam. Portfolio management course, and then establishing and managing the PMO are some courses that can support your organizational journey to get to effective portfolio management. Okay, so we're coming up to the end here. We have some recommended global knowledge courses that can help you out here. PM funds, I already talked about these. So just think about that as you're trying to build your organizational project management toolkit. Make sure that your people are working on the same set of parameters. That's probably one of the most foundational and important things to do, is make sure that people are actually conducting their projects in a consistent, repeatable manner. Private group training. So Global Knowledge has the ability to tailor our courses to projects or case studies that you're working on right now, and we can deliver them in a private setting at your location. So also, we have free resource, our Knowledge Center. We have lots of assessments and blogs there, case studies you can read, special reports, videos, webinars, white papers, all kinds of assets that you can leverage at your organization. They're all free. So if you want to take a look at that, we would encourage it. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to any questions. And so, Michelle, do we have any?
Yeah, it looks like there's a few coming in. First one, for a functional or weak matrix organization, what is the recommended approach to prepare this organization for a PMO and an adequate portfolio management?
Okay, well, it's most difficult when you have a functional or a weak matrix organization, because that means that your project managers and a lot of times your program managers are not really, that's like not their job title. They're usually some other job title, and they say, okay, well, we're going to do this, and by the way, you're the project manager for it. So their staff isn't full-time. A lot of times they're not even full-time. And so in an environment like that, that still doesn't mean that we should be launching projects without regard to capacity. I guess the number one obstacle there in that kind of an organization, because if you're in a weak matrix organization, that means you're in an organization where many times the projects are almost seen as sort of an afterthought and not, the primary way through which we achieve our organizational objectives, which support our organizational strategy. So that's a conversation that needs to be had with senior management. And depending on the vertical communication structure in your organization, that sometimes can be very difficult to do. So you're going to have to get your direct leadership team involved, because I don't know the level or the job function of the person that submitted that question. But if you are a, say, director level or something like that, or some sort of management level, you've got to go to your management and say, hey, I'd like I'd like to make a proposal. And many times it's just about drafting a business case, showing a business case on, hey, how can this help our organization? Because most people in the C-suite are worried about one thing and one thing only, and that's the bottom line. At least, most of them are. Some are more altruistic, but most of them are worried about the bottom line. If you can make a value proposition to them to show them, okay, this is how we can more effectively manage all the projects going on in the organization, it's usually a no-brainer if you can show them, or demonstrate through something like a business case how it would help to drive revenue or save revenue. So I hope that answered your question, and we'll go for another one, Michelle.
What are the main challenges that organizations typically face when establishing a portfolio management as a key tool to drive the strategy?
The main deterrent most of the time is functional managers. It's functional managers, those directors, senior directors, VPs, senior VPs, who have departments and have budgets, and they don't want anybody telling them what to do. And they don't want anybody questioning or second-guessing their great ideas. And, a lot of times, I worked in an organization one time where we used to only say, well, the good idea fairy came and visited somebody last night because I don't know where this idea came from. Well, if there's somebody there that's acting as sort of the goalie, if you will, on the good idea fairy, sometimes executives don't like that, or senior management doesn't like that. The primary thing that stops it, because when you go, like if you had access to and had a conversation with your organizational CEO and said, hey, I've got a really great idea on how we can save the organization a bunch of money and make sure that our projects that we fund and spend time and resources on are the right ones that are going to support us, I don't think any of them would be like, no, I'm not interested. But when usually the gatekeeper there is those people in those senior VP, director, senior director positions that will stop that message from getting up there because they're giving up some control. The way to really kind of get them on board is say, no, we're not going to take you out of the decision-making process. As a matter of fact, all of the functional managers or departmental managers, whatever we're going to call that in the organization, are going to sit on the portfolio governance board. So they're going to be able to still have input into what projects get selected. It's not being taken out of your hand. The portfolio manager is just going to make sure that you're aware of everything else going on in the organization so that you can have what I like to call situational awareness across the organization instead of only looking at my silo. So get your immediate manager's buy-in, and then once you do that, it's much easier to get senior executive buy-in for portfolio management. All right, I think we got time for about one more question.
Do you recommend an actual resource management package in lieu of simply using MS Project for resource leveling?
I mean, I don't know. I guess it would depend on the size of your organization, and I don't think I'm going to be able to I mean, I like Project. I think that it's a good resource management tool. Depending on the size of the organization, a more powerful application may not be required to, to conduct activities like resource smoothing or resource leveling. So, do I recommend? I'm not going to make a recommendation on any sort of a product because I don't want to be shilling for anybody other than Global Knowledge on this website. I mean, on this webinar. So no, I think Project's a great tool. Most organizations don't have a requirement to have anything much more powerful than that. So no, there's nothing really I'd recommend other than what the questioner brought up. So okay, I think that's about it. It's 2 o'clock or 1:59 anyway by my Mickey. So let's go ahead, and I just want to say thanks for attending the webinar. Michelle's got the rest of the questions. I'll go ahead and answer those, and we can send out the answers to the folks who attended the webinar. When you're going on to PMI.org and you're going to register for your PDUs, Global Knowledge is Registered Education Provider 1999, and the activity number for this one, so if you put in our rep number, 1999, and then activity number, 500001, this webinar will come up. So I registered this with PMI for PDUs, and so it was already approved. Any questions, just let us know. You can always call us at 1-800-COURSES or visit our website at globalknowledge.com or email for info at am_info@globalknowledge.com. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate everybody that came in today, and hope everybody has a good rest of the day and a good weekend.